Jay Leno's public life has always been loud with laughter, motion, and momentum, but behind that familiar rhythm was a man using humor as structure, safety, and identity. In recent years, that structure began to shift. What emerged was not a dramatic collapse, but a quiet reckoning shaped by injury, loss, responsibility, and love. This story is not about the end of a career, but about a change in purpose. It follows a man who spent decades making the world laugh, now learning how to sit with stillness, care for someone he loves, and choose meaning over applause. What follows is a human story of endurance, devotion, and grace. Humor as armor and identity. For most of his life, Jay Leno relied on humor not just as a profession, but as protection. Jokes gave him control over rooms, conversations, and expectations. Comedy became both his voice and his shield, allowing him to keep emotional distance while still being present. Audiences saw confidence and consistency, but underneath was a man who rarely allowed vulnerability to surface. This approach worked for decades, helping him navigate fame, pressure, and constant public scrutiny. Humor shaped how he moved through the world, how he connected, and how he avoided confronting deeper fears. Yet humor, while powerful, has limits. When life delivered challenges that could not be laughed away, the shield began to crack. What once provided safety could no longer carry the emotional weight he was facing, forcing him to confront life without a punchline to lean on. A life built on motion and momentum. Jay Leno's identity was deeply tied to movement. Long hours on stage, touring schedules, filming commitments, and time spent restoring cars defined his days. His body and mind were always engaged, always forward-looking. Motion kept reflection at bay and gave structure to his sense of purpose. This constant activity wasn't just habit, it was how he stayed connected to who he believed himself to be. Slowing down was never part of the plan. The idea of stillness felt unnatural, even threatening. His life thrived on routines built around productivity and passion. But motion can also mask exhaustion. Over time, the pace became harder to sustain, especially as age and unforeseen events intervened. When the machinery of his daily life began to stall, Jay was forced to face questions he had long postponed about identity, relevance, and what remains when movement stops. The garage fire and its aftermath. In 2022, a fire in Jay Leno's garage marked a profound turning point. The garage had long been a personal sanctuary, a place of comfort, creativity, and control. The accident disrupted that sense of safety. Publicly, Jay minimized the incident, leaning again on humor and reassurance. Privately, the experience left lasting emotional and physical consequences. Recovery required time, patience, and acceptance, qualities that do not come easily to someone used to constant motion. The scars were not only physical. The fire introduced vulnerability in a way he could not fully deflect. It reminded him of fragility and uncertainty, truths he had rarely acknowledged. While he returned to public appearances quickly, something had shifted. The experience lingered beneath the surface, quietly altering how he viewed his body, his routines, and the illusion of invincibility he had carried for years. Another accident, and the weight of survival. Not long after the fire, a motorcycle accident added another layer of strain. Injuries piled onto injuries, and recovery became more demanding. The closeness to mortality was impossible to ignore. While Jay continued working, the physical toll began to affect his emotional state. Pain slows reflection, and reflection invites change. Each injury reinforced the reality that his body could no longer keep pace with the life he had built. Survival brought gratitude, but also questions. Why keep pushing at the same speed? What was he running toward or away from? The accidents forced him to acknowledge limits he had never needed to face before. For someone who thrived on resilience and endurance, this was deeply unsettling. Yet within that discomfort was the beginning of a quieter understanding that survival alone is not the same as living well. A career shift that felt like closure. When Jay Leno's long-running automotive show was moved aside due to network changes, it represented more than a scheduling adjustment. After decades with the same network, the decision felt symbolic, like the closing of a chapter. While publicly framed as business, privately, it marked the erosion of a professional constant. The show had blended his love for machines with storytelling and connection. Losing that platform forced him to confront a future without familiar anchors. It wasn't bitterness that surfaced, but reflection. Careers, like bodies, have seasons. The shift prompted Jay to reassess where he wanted to place his remaining energy. Without the structure of long-term commitments, he found himself with time and emotional space he had rarely experienced. That space, while unsettling, created room for deeper priorities to rise to the surface. Love, marriage, and a quiet crisis. At home, Jay faced his most personal challenge. His wife Mavis, his partner of over 40 years, began experiencing cognitive decline. At first subtle, the changes grew more pronounced over time. The woman who had been fiercely independent slowly became dependent. Watching someone you love change in this way brings a unique kind of grief, one that unfolds daily. Jay was confronted with the pain of repetition, loss, and emotional responsibility. Each morning required patience and compassion. This was not a battle that could be fixed or rushed. It demanded presence, consistency, and emotional endurance. For someone accustomed to solving problems through action, this kind of caregiving required a different strength. It reshaped his understanding of love, not as shared adventure, but as steady commitment through uncertainty and loss. Choosing care over control. Filing for conservatorship was a deeply personal decision, rooted in protection rather than authority. It symbolized Jay's acceptance of a new role, not as entertainer or caretaker of machines, but as guardian of his wife's well-being. The process required humility and transparency, qualities often hidden behind fame. This step marked a shift from independence to interdependence. Caregiving became his central responsibility, guiding his daily choices. Rather than resisting the role, he embraced it with quiet resolve. The decision reflected growth, maturity, and love grounded in action. It was not about preserving dignity through distance, but through presence. In choosing care over control, Jay demonstrated that true strength sometimes means standing still, listening, and showing up consistently, even when recognition is absent and outcomes are uncertain. Aging, fatigue, and redefined strength. As injuries healed slowly and energy waned, Jay confronted the realities of aging. Tasks that once felt effortless now required planning and rest. This physical slowdown mirrored an emotional one. Aging forced him to reevaluate what productivity meant. Strength was no longer measured by output or endurance, but by adaptability and intention. Accepting limitations did not come easily, but it brought clarity. He began to value conservation of energy, choosing where to invest himself. This shift wasn't surrender, but recalibration. Aging stripped away illusions of permanence and replaced them with appreciation for what remains. In learning to pace himself, Jay discovered a quieter form of resilience, one rooted in awareness and care, rather than relentless drive. Stepping back from the spotlight. Jay's decision to step away from public life was not dramatic or final. It was intentional. He chose to reduce appearances, not out of bitterness, but alignment. The spotlight, once energizing, no longer matched his priorities. Instead of performing for audiences, he focused on being present for his wife and preserving his own health. This withdrawal was not disappearance, but redirection. Fame had given him a voice, but silence now offered peace. By stepping back, he reclaimed agency over his time. The choice reflected maturity and courage, showing that knowing when to stop can be as meaningful as knowing how to begin. Legacy through giving and honesty. Rather than preserving his car collection as personal legacy, Jay chose to share it for future generations. Donating vehicles to educational programs reflected his belief in purpose beyond ownership. Machines that once fueled his passion would now inspire others. Alongside this, he committed to honest storytelling through a documentary and memoir. These projects are not celebrations of success, but reflections on endurance, love, and change. They aim to tell the truth simply, without performance. Through giving and storytelling, Jay reframed legacy not as fame remembered, but impact extended. His story now lives not in punchlines, but in choices shaped by compassion and clarity.